This is the 23rd episode of the Effective Executive Podcast. And this week I've titled the episode Begin Your Quest. And a lot of you know, well, I should say less than half of you now, just because the podcast has grown so much, know that I had an original podcast called Mind Your Noodles, where I went through and started to understand the brain and some of the things that they were finding out about the brain and how it works. And there's been so much research, so I devoted a whole podcast to that, Mind Your Noodles type thinking. And as I researched, I came across a lot of different things that really affected how I think about not only coaching executives, but teams and how organizations can really improve. And I believe it was the 16th episode, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but talked about the ventral striatum, which is this, some have referenced it as the seeking system, that your brain has this want to be curious, to explore, to discover, those types of things. And, in last week's podcast, I talked a lot about how we've gotten disconnected from the customer as executives, as and even employees. The more connected we are to the customer, and some of the ancillary departments like IT and finance, and parts of the organization that don't normally come into contact with the customer are left wanting because they don't really understand the customer, so there's a gap there. And this started, originally when we were building things. It came from, it was you had a craft, you had a cobbler that made a shoe, and so they were able to work with the customer and make the shoe the way that the employee or the customer wanted it, and they got satisfaction because you knew that you had provisioned, had manufactured a shoe for the customer in such a way. And there's a lot of feedback and there's a lot of waste in there and those types of things, but the satisfaction from a worker standpoint was very high. And then during the Industrial Revolution, it all changed, right? We got separated from the customer, and we got departments, and we got experts, and we got all these people, and so we've lost that particular connection. And one of the things that really stands out to me is that, from working with a lot of contact centers, is that they get separated from the customer too. You would think, well, how could that happen? Well, they answer the phone all the time, and that separation from the customer is they have to hand it off to somebody else eventually in order to get the problem resolved. So you never see what the resolution is for the customer. And so work has become less meaningful in that way. Now, I believe you can design organizations to mitigate some of those things, but I'm not going to talk about that this particular week. But going back to our seeking system, we seek through curiosity. We seek from that connection to the customer. We seek some way, some new insight, some new discovery in the way that we operate. And so what I'm asking people to do is that they should, and maybe they feel like they're already in it, but to begin your quest. In other words, that you need to experiment, that you need to see what you're capable of, not only as an individual, but as a team and as an organization. And it also starts to show you what the why of your work is. And again, in those three areas, as an individual, as a team, as an organization. And so in getting to that whole quest of going through from experimentation, meaning discovering better ways of doing things, and innovating products and services. And this is really at the heart of what capitalism is all about. And growing an economy is innovation. This is where you're going to get your biggest leaps. So it's something that I encourage individuals to do, executives, that they begin to experiment, because this raises your curiosity. And if you're a veteran, my three target audiences are veteran, new, and aspiring executives. If you're a veteran executive, seeing things in new ways can really re-energize you. You hear about executive burnout and things of that sort. Well, the way to mitigate that is, well, let's just put it this way. Your brain is going to draw from one of two chemicals. One is dopamine, which is the one that gets you curious, the one that really energizes you to get to the finish line. And then you have cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And it seems like most executives that I have worked with over the years seem to be in this constant state of getting the dopamine, the high of being in the position versus the lows of the stress of the job. But the more that you can tap into dopamine by learning new things, being curious, finding meaning in your work, experimentation, this will help not only define your purpose and your why for yourself, but also for your team and your organization. So I wanted to cover this week because I thought it was important, especially after talking about customers and how important it is for ancillary groups like finance and IT to connect to the customer, because this does create a dopamine. It gives you new insight. It creates curiosity about why you do the things that you do, as opposed to saying, God, they're just dumb because that department, they're that department. So it's not like that. But to follow on with that, the seeking system, this ventral striatum, our need to discover, be curious, find new ways to experiment and discover our why, are really things that are important, again, to individuals, teams, and to the organization. So hopefully this has been helpful. Please, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and hit the bell, and you'll get some other tips of things for you to think about. A lot of the executive education program that I do is all about building these things. So I go through this process. One of the first ways that I tap into your quest, if you will, is through synthetic thinking, and it's going to give you a different perspective, and that's what a lot of people really need, because they know how to be analytical and break things apart, but they're not very good at looking at the whole. So we develop that particular skill, and these skills are more important today than ever, to have that ability to do those things. So, and then if you are interested in tapping into the podcast, then you can go to the95method.com/broadcasts. And again, I'll put these things in the show notes.